Welcome to UnDiet Monday. It is Monday. It's feeling like a Monday, but it's the first Monday in June. Happy Pride Month. And school is almost over. I have two kids, a 12-year-old and a 17-year-old. And May really was exhausting. And actually, like my oldest is going to be a senior next year. So I do feel a little like, oh my gosh, I can't believe like this is the last summer before all the things happen with her leaving the nest. So trying to soak it all in. I was never one of those moms that was like really into parenting newborns and toddlers. I've really enjoyed having teenagers. So that's why I think I'm feeling a little bit more nostalgic in this time period. But with that all being said, welcome to UnDiet Monday. I call it UnDiet Monday because Mondays were always the busiest day for me when I was working with clients. And Mondays was when everybody was talking about their diet, right? Especially if you were going into an office or dropping off kids or something like that. And I want Mondays to not be about starting a new diet. I want them to be another day to help you to stay connected to yourself and your own wisdom that you probably have been working hard to stay connected to in this world that is like constantly on fire. So, hey, Lucy and Tamisha, I'm so glad that you are joining. And with this UnDiet Monday, I have a mini session planned for us. I'm going to be talking to you about something that I love talking about for many different reasons, but I'm going to be talking about finding your food voice with insulin resistance. And it's something that I've spent a lot of time in my career talking to people about. And it's something that I also experience myself. I have insulin resistance. So I can't wait to share some of the tips and tools and strategies that I've helped clients with, and then also that I've used myself. So we will go through that in a second. But I wanted to share a few things that are going on this week just to put them on your radar. One is I have a new podcast episode dropping tomorrow. I normally do a podcast episode every week. And now that I'm doing Substack more and really spending more time with my writing, which is something that I have found that I love so much in this season of my life. After writing the Find Your Food Voice book, it just helped me reconnect to that love of writing. And like I told you, May is exhausting. So I decided to give myself some extra space. And so I just I turned the dial down of my podcast episode frequency to every other week. And so I have one tomorrow that is all about Mel Robbins, the Let Them theory, and the viral 11 push-up video. Have you seen the 11 push-up video? It's made its rounds, and it was one that I was interviewed for on Vox, and I hadn't seen it before I got the interview request, but of course, when I watched it, I was like horrified. So my team and I, we break down just some reactions to that video, and then also the Let Them Theory book, and also just how pervasive some of the kind of bro marketing has been getting into the wellness space. And it seems like there's like ebbs and flows of it. 10-ish years ago, it seemed like a lot of people were moving more towards like inclusive nutrition and talking about movement and things like that. And it seems like right now it just is going back to the early time of my career in dietetics. And unfortunately, that's what we're picking up with a lot of the Mel Robbins advice. And we also talk about some of the things that we've enjoyed in the Let Them theory and just in some of her work, but also, I don't know, just an examination if you're trying to live your life from a place of anti-diet living, just an examination of it. So we hope it helps you as you're navigating that conversation, and also just anything new that you kind of come across and try and decide if it's something that you want to apply or not. The other thing I am working on is I'm reviewing 3 books this week, which is, I don't know, I kind of feel a little nervous. Like, am I able to get through all this? Because I'm a really, really slow reader, a pretty quick writer, but a slow reader. And, but these are all books that I'm really excited about. So it has helped tremendously. The first one is How to Eat Well. I know it's backwards, but you get the gist, right? How to Eat Well with ADHD. And this is by Becca King. I think it was 3 years ago, Becca was on the Find Your Food Voice podcast. You may know her from being on, Instagram as the ADHD nutritionist, but she's an anti-diet dietitian. She lives in North Carolina where I live, and again, now specializes in ADHD. I do have a kid with ADHD, so I've always stayed connected to her work, for that reason. It's helped me in just managing this particular child's eating and helping this person, yeah, just navigate life with ADHD. But I'm going to be interviewing Becca again because of this new book. And again, it's been over 3 years, so it was time. I'm going to be interviewing Becca on Wednesday. And what we're going to talk about in particular is the intersection of ADHD and PCOS. So whether you have either one or the both together, which so many of you have that. I know so many people have ADHD and PCOS together. So we're going to have a conversation about it. And reviewing her book, what I found is a lot of the things that my clients with PCOS over the years have found to be helpful as they're repairing the relationship with food and helping with their energy levels. Um, these are things that Becca also recommends for ADHD, and I'm really curious to see, I don't know, where this conversation goes. Lucy, thank you for commenting. So you have both. And Lucy, or anyone listening, if you have any questions in particular about ADHD and PCOS, definitely drop them here in the chat or DM me or however you want to communicate. I would love to know any questions you have so I can make the interview what you need it to be, any kind of burning questions that you have. I have some in particular, but I don't have um, PCOS or ADHD. So I feel like I'm kind of coming from a different angle that may not be as useful. So I would love to be able to um, answer any questions you may have. Oh, and so Lucy is saying that you also have PMDD. Yes, the trifecta: PMDD, PCOS, and ADHD. Oh my. Wow. Yes. You must be exhausted, especially certain times of your cycles if you're still cycling. So, um, anyway, that is one book that I am reviewing this week. The other one is more clinician based, and I haven't started yet. Like I'm halfway done with Becca's, but the other one I'm reviewing is this one. Which, if you're not a clinician, it may not be as exciting to you. But if you work with a clinician and you're struggling with GI disorders and also an eating disorder, you'll be really grateful that it exists so your clinician can better help you. Or you can be like me and just get the clinician books and glean what you want from it. I've done that so many times when I was like doing my own therapy before I was trained as a therapist. But anyway, this is a book that my friend, my really good friend and colleague, Beth Rosen, she is one of the authors. Let's see, there's 10 authors listed on here. So lots of people who have expertise in eating disorders and GI disorders came together. It sounds like rather organically they came together and they decided to make this resource. So really excited about reading that one. And honestly, working with PCOS for so long, the reason why I was working with PCOS in general is because I was specializing in eating disorders, and so many people with PCOS just kept showing up. And so then I ended up having to figure out, how am I going to help someone with PCOS without dieting? And so it became this kind of specialization that I had. And a lot of my colleagues that specialize in eating disorders and GI disorders have the same kind of experience. And I mentioned Beth Rosen, one of the authors, but she's someone that when I had clients with PCOS and some GI issue come up, I would often either seek consultation from Beth or refer them to Beth for a while. And so, yeah, this is going to be super helpful for my clinical practice. And I'll let you know. I'll let you know any kind of tidbits that I find along the way. And I'm definitely going to be having Beth on the podcast soon. She's also writing a book, and like a more consumer type GI disorder book. I don't think it's going to be out for a while, but I've also seen her a little bit on Substack. So she's here somewhere. If you're watching, Beth, hey, I just gave you a shout out. I hope you don't mind. But lastly, the third book that I am reviewing is a digital book. So I can't show you the actual copy, but it's Unapologetic Aging by Deb Benfield, who I believe is also on Substack or is going to be soon. But Deb is one of my mentors. She's, let's see, about 15, 16 years older than me, which has been so important for me in just growing as a human, especially in the non-diet space. And Deb's book is coming out in December, I believe. So you can pre-order it now. I actually have a link to it in on my bookshop on what is it, bookshop.org. You can find a link to it. But so far, I love it. I'm 50 years old. I just turned 50 a few weeks ago, and the book is divided into three sections. And I don't know if you ever do this, but I look, especially for like self-help books, I look at the table of contents, and then whatever I'm drawn to first, I just go there. I'm like, I'm not going to go from page one and all the way through it. I may eventually, but I usually just kind of go where the vibe takes me. And so part three goes into body liberation and aging and like dating, sex, all of that kind of discussion that I have never seen before from especially from a dietitian. So kudos to Deb. It's a really great section. When I was reading it, I was like, yes, this is so much of what I was like worried about, concerned about because I got divorced a few years ago and started dating. And I really wish I would have had that book back then. It would have been super helpful as I was navigating like, yeah, just like dating and intimacy and all of that. So I'm about a third of the way through that one, and I will be finishing that one up by the end of the week. And yeah, so I'm going to be doing a lot of reading this week. So, with that all being said, I want to get to the mini session. Are y'all ready? Let's do it. Right? Let me pull out my notes so I don't forget anything because, as you probably can tell, I can get to talking and then lose my train of thought. But I wanted to talk about insulin resistance in particular with finding your food voice. And Find Your Food Voice is the book that I released March 25th. So it is out, it is in the world, anywhere books are sold. And this is a book that is for anyone with a complicated history with food. But in particular, if you have any kind of chronic condition, I had you in mind when I was reading it because, again, I was specializing in helping people with their relationship with food and eating disorder recovery for many years. And I didn't necessarily want to specialize in any kind of medical condition anymore. I was just really into food behavior and helping people to rewrite their kind of relationship with food. But people with PCOS just kept showing up. And one thing that's a really common part of living with PCOS is insulin resistance. When I was starting to do this work, I did have a personal connection because I have known for a really long time that my DNA, like my genetics, are just saturated with diabetes, meaning all of my grandparents have had diabetes at some point. None of them are living anymore. And one died in his 80s, but the rest lived to their mid 90s, or I think one of my grandparents lived to be 99 with diabetes. So I say that to mean, or just to communicate that having diabetes, one, genetics is the biggest part of like someone actually having diabetes. Like it's the biggest influence is still genetics, even though I think the messages we get are so much on individual behaviors, but genetics is still the number one like pull for someone to actually have diabetes. But that also, it's not a death sentence. It doesn't mean you are going to go blind or lose a limb. Certainly, those things happen, and people need compassionate, kind interventions for these kind of complications. And having diabetes and healthcare is one of the biggest things that helps you prevent those kind of long-term complications. So that's why if you're a healthcare provider or health coach and you're watching this, welcome. But like providing a space that allows people to feel like safe in your office or safer in your office so then they feel like they don't have to avoid healthcare is one of the best things you can do for diabetes care. But when I was helping people, excuse me, I'm getting a ton of texts. Oh my gosh. Okay. But when I was helping people with PCOS for so long and having insulin resistance, I also was appreciating that, like, I also was probably going to be experiencing some parts of insulin resistance that my clients were also experiencing. But a word on that, especially Lucy and anybody else who's listening who has PCOS, living with PCOS and insulin resistance is different than insulin resistance without PCOS. And here's the difference. Insulin resistance basically means your body is having a hard time um, using the food we eat for energy, in particular carbohydrates, breaking it down and getting the energy into the cell. There's something that happens with the insulin receptors, like kind of the keyhole that opens the door to the cell. The insulin receptors become damaged and and need repair. That is something that's really normal as we go through aging. Everyone experiences that. And there are nutrients that our body needs to fix these insulin receptors. And one of the pathologies, or like one of the ways that we end up having insulin resistance, is these repair centers are not working. And so insulin there's just more insulin released, and it eventually wears out the pancreas years and years later and moves to type 2 diabetes. Now, that's just one of the pathways to type 2 diabetes. But when you have insulin resistance, you basically have a lot more insulin circulating in your blood. And it can cause some things like fatigue, intense cravings, sleep disruptions. It can cause some darker or rougher patches on your skin. And when you have PCOS, it is so much different because your insulin levels are much, much higher. There's so much more insulin that an A1C, and that's something I talked about in my last UnDiet Monday live, was like how to figure out if you have insulin resistant issues. Your blood sugar ends up being normal for a really, really long time. When I say normal, your blood sugar looks normal on an A1C because insulin is just so high. And for me, not having PCOS, but also experiencing insulin resistance, my A1C showed it creeping up much sooner because, again, my insulin is just not as high as someone with PCOS. And I think it's really important to note, like with PCOS, you can use a lot of the research that people have on insulin resistance, but just know you probably have more intense symptoms. You have probably more intense carb cravings. Like I can remember having like carbohydrate cravings, but when my clients with PCOS would talk about it, they sounded like primal and almost like they felt like an animal. Like they just felt like out of their brain. Um, and it was impossible to like walk past a box of donuts because every cell in their body was like, you have to eat those. Now I had a pull to eat carbohydrates, but did not feel that quite that magnetic. But I also know that with PCOS and the higher circulating insulin, your sleep will be worse, your fatigue will be worse. Like I'm tired. I get that. And oh my gosh, the texting and the phone calls right now are a lot. Sorry. But so yeah, your sleep will be disrupted with PCOS so much more. There's a higher likelihood of you having a sleep disorder. So with that being said, when you are trying to help your insulin levels come down, which will help with all those symptoms, if you do any kind of Google Scholar search, or of course, now when we Google anything, it's just going to be AI answers. It looks at a lot of like cutting out foods instead of something that maybe aligns more with not dieting. And so it's UnDiet Monday. So I want to share with you some ways that you can, in particular, pinpoint on treating insulin resistance without dieting. And these are things that I've taught clients and also used myself it's probably been almost 10 years that I've had insulin resistance. So the first one is probably not going to be a surprise to you, but it's really, really, really important when you have insulin resistance is making sure that you are not skipping any meals. And I would also say if you're someone that needs snacks between meals, which that'll probably just depend on how old you are, how much activity you're getting, how much stress you're having, how your sleep is, all of those things. But you may need meals and snacks pretty consistently. And let's see, this was probably 20 years ago now. I was a diabetes educator. And one of the things I noticed with all the fancy equipment and glucose monitoring and all these different tools that we had, that getting consistent eating in and just being really kind of boring with your eating in that way, like having really consistent meal times was one of the most impressive things that you could do to help your blood sugar and your insulin levels. So just, I know it's boring, it's not flashy, it's not sexy, but yet having very consistent eating times is one of the best things that you can do. So don't skip meals, make sure you're trying to eat within the first hour of being awake, having really good boundaries with making sure you have time to eat in the middle of the day. And, something that I've noticed over the last 10 years working with more people who have experimented with continuous glucose monitoring, which we should probably do a whole mini session on these glucose monitors, but because there's a lot of nuance with it. But having data from people, what I've noticed is when people do go longer without eating, all it ends up doing is causing this kind of bounce around spike effect. And if you've never done a glucose monitor, these are those continuous ones where you have it kind of plugged in and you can continuously see your blood sugar. If you've never done those, you may already know when your blood sugar and your insulin levels are spiking, like they're spiking up and down, and this kind of causes this like bounce around effect. You may know when that is happening because you can feel like super sluggish, super tired. You may feel a migraine or just really like massive, like kind of stress, headache pressure. And I say all that because my clients who were doing the glucose monitoring, those like physical symptoms were happening and also seeing the bounce around. And so make sure that you're not skipping meals, and that will help prevent that bounce around because that bounce around is how all the side effects happen, right? And make sure you also are eating enough and kind of moving into some curious kind of nutrition that I think is a way that I teach in the Find Your Food Voice book to see what kind of nutrition advice is actually going to help your blood sugar and your insulin levels. Like, what can you add instead of what you can take away is something that I would encourage you to use as like maybe to experiment with, but like to go from that frame of mind instead of like taking away. What can you add to your eating in order to see what helps you? And in particular with PCOS and insulin resistance, I've just noticed over the 20 plus years now that you probably just need more protein than everybody else. And I know protein is kind of like the safe macronutrient right now, but it also is something that getting this like huge amount that's often recommended is not necessarily what I recommend, but just adding it throughout the day is something that my clients have found to be really helpful. And I know for me and living with my insulin resistance, that's something that I have found. And also, there are times where I don't want any more protein. Like, just it doesn't sound appealing. And especially this time of year when it gets hot, I'm just so much more like, I don't have any patience for no. And so when you're not feeling it with the protein and you just are sick of all those choices, what I've noticed is you can also experiment with adding fat or fiber, and sometimes it's a mixture of all of them. So, what I know as a dietitian, especially working with diabetes and insulin for so long, is when you have carbohydrate and you have it mixed with other things like protein, fat, or fiber, it basically just slows down the digestion of it. And as I say this, everyone is different. Like, you may find that fiber and protein really help your digestion and your energy levels, but fat does nothing. Or, some variants of that. So definitely experiment with it and see. But if you're someone who eats a bowl of Cheerios in the morning and you feel really hungry like an hour later and you're like, I don't have time for this, I have to go work, or I just don't, I want to have more energy for my food. It's not taking away the Cheerios. It's just adding more to it. So you may have some like breakfast sausage with it. Or I have a story. Actually, I don't know if I included this in the book. It's something that I included in my PCOS Power membership. Was a story of someone who added chicken nuggets to their breakfast because it was like a really accessible option. They could get it's this huge bag of chicken nuggets at Walmart in their budget, and it was one of the things that helped their blood sugar come down, and they were starting to have a cycle, and it helped their fertility and all that stuff. So you can be unconventional, I guess is what I'm saying. So the other thing I want to mention is another way to help your food voice while also living with insulin resistance is experimenting with some supplementation. A lot of supplements are super gimmicky and I roll my eyes a lot at them. And when working with people with super high circulating insulin in their insulin resistance and PCOS, I've learned that supplements have their place. They can really help, especially if you're like working on repairing your relationship with food and working on adding enough. That takes time. And for many people I worked with, it took over a year to get to the point where they were eating enough to help energy levels and just to figure out how much was enough for them. And so adding an inositol supplement, which it's a weird word, and I'm going to type it in the chat so you can see it. Um, it's funny that my chat I say this word so much that it knows how to spell it, which cracks me up. So inositol is a B vitamin. There are actually 9 different types of inositols. And what researchers have found is with insulin resistance, if you remember earlier, I was mentioning that with insulin resistance, there are um, insulin receptors that get broken. And it's really normal as we age for this to happen. And our body is able to repair them. Inositols are one of the tools that our body like sends out, and we get inositol from food. There are a few different types of inositol that our body will use then to help repair insulin receptors. And there's either a defect or a deficiency of inositols that's provoking insulin resistance. And by supplementing with it, if you do have insulin resistance, especially if you are over the age of 30, there's some of my clients who've been younger didn't quite feel as much umph with supplementing with inositol, but it's something that I have just seen to be really helpful. And I feel great that there's a lot of research behind it. And when I noticed about 10 years ago, starting to feel symptoms of insulin resistance, and then I got some labs done, and I was like, yep, okay, I'm on the Duffy path of having diabetes. I did start an insulin or an inositol supplement. Now, there is dosing that has been shown in research, but there's like this one specific dose that has been researched the most, and not everyone needs that amount. That's something that I have found. If you have PCOS and you're over the age of 30 and you have very high insulin levels, you probably need the full dose, which is it's basically 2 scoops of the powder a day or the 2050 milligrams twice a day. I have all of this like nitty gritty on inositol on my website. If you go to my website, julieduffydillon.com/inositol, it has like all the breakdown for you. I'm also working on an update that I will put on Substack at some point. Anyway, with that being said, if you do have very, very high insulin levels, you will need that higher dose. And I found for me, having that higher dose did not make me feel good. I did not like, it made my anxiety worse. I felt shaky. I probably was making it like it was just too much. And so I did half of a dose, which is just that 1 scoop or 2050 milligrams a day. And that's all I needed for a long time. I want to say 7 or 8 years. And then just in the last year, I've needed to increase it to add the second dose. And what I noticed pretty quickly within about a month is it helped my sleep and my energy levels and my cycle as well. I'm perimenopausal, not to give you too much information, but like, so I skip a few cycles. But it made the cycles that I did have more normal, which is great. So, um, and then the other thing I want to mention, I talked a little bit about sleep, but I think like sleep and boundaries is the other piece that I spent a lot of time talking about in the Find Your Food Voice book because adding enough rest is kind of radical, especially living in the United States and in capitalism. But being exhausted and not getting enough sleep is something that really hurts your insulin levels. It also hurts your inflammation levels. And doing things to help you to get enough rest, even if it's just pausing for like a minute um, throughout your workday, is something that can really help your insulin levels. And there's lots of great research behind it too. Like I mentioned, 75% of people with PCOS have some type of sleep disorder. So getting a test done probably about every 5 years at least, if you have PCOS, is important. And it's something that I have on my 2025 calendar for myself, is to get my first sleep study. So wish me luck. Um, all right, I have one more thing, and I know I'm over time. I usually like to just keep these at 30 minutes, but whatever. I like to talk a lot. But the last thing I wanted to mention to help you find your food voice with insulin resistance is to find as many tools as possible to avoid weight, that kind of your weight going up and down. Just like blood sugar and insulin levels going up and down being really the thing that ends up hurting the body long term, weight cycling has a similar effect. And you're it's not necessarily the weight loss or regain, it's like the bouncing around of both has been found to further cause higher insulin levels and higher inflammation. So I know dieting in the short term has been found to correlate with lower insulin levels, but long term, chronic dieting makes insulin worse. So just try as hard as you can to avoid dieting, avoid triggers for diet culture, find community that is in a more of a place of promoting body liberation. Those are things that are going to help you long term with your food voice and your insulin levels. So, I need to wrap up, and it was a pleasure connecting with you all today on this On Diet Monday. I will be sending out, I don't know, I always